Hi everyone, my name is Sara Ostman, and on behalf of ALA's Public Programs Office, I am excited to introduce our webinar today. ALA's Sara Jaffarian Award presents Creating an Interactive Exhibit in Your School Library. Some of you may have heard about ALA's Sara Jaffarian Award already. It recognizes a K-8 school library for an outstanding humanities program. Today we're going to hear from the winner of the 2016 Jaffarian Award, who is going to talk about her school's 8th grade research project based on the Greensboro sit-ins. I have a few brief announcements before we begin. Today's webinar is presented by ALA's Public Programs Office with support from ALA's Cultural Communities Fund. Contributions to the Cultural Communities Fund make webinars like this possible, and they also make the Jaffarian Award possible. So if you are in a position to support CCF, you can visit us online at ala.org/CCF. I'd also like to make a quick plug for our website, Programming Librarian. We have lots of program ideas, resources, and on-demand webinars like this one, all available for free. And you can search the site by library type to find content specific to school libraries. We send a free newsletter twice per month. To sign up to receive that newsletter, visit programminglibrarian.org and click About. Finally, a few quick notes about our virtual classroom. Our presenters are the only ones with microphone access, but you're welcome to type your questions or comments in the chat box. We have one speaker today, and we will have time for a Q&A with her at the end of her talk. If you have any technical issues over the next hour, please send a private message to PPO Super Admin. To do that, just hover over the words PPO Super Admin at the top right corner of your screen and select Start Private Chat. And finally, this webinar is being recorded, and the archive version will be available on programminglibrarian.org in the section called Learning. Viewing is free, so feel free to share and share widely. And I'd like to introduce our speaker, Constance Vidor. Constance is the Director of Library Services at Friends Seminary, a K-12 independent Quaker school in Manhattan. Her career has encompassed public and independent school librarianship, college teaching, and storytelling. She finds inspiration for library programs in museum visits, worldwide travels, and in conversations with students. In the summer, you can often find her reading on a bench in Central Park, the setting of her favorite book, The Prince of Central Park by Evan K. Rhodes. And with that, I'll turn the mic over to Constance.
Hello, everybody. It's wonderful to have you here. Welcome to the webinar, and I hope you all enjoy learning about this program. You're looking at the first slide, and there's a photograph of 4 young men whose names are Joseph McNeil, Franklin McCain, Ezell Blair Jr., and David Richmond. And if you signed up for this webinar, you probably already know a little bit about the sit-ins, and you're going to hear more from my students in a few slides, but I wanted to acknowledge them as being the heart of this program. I'll be talking about the content, and I'll be talking a lot about the structure and the strategies that we use, so that you may find that you want to use some of these strategies with different content, or you may want to use this content, but with a slightly different set of strategies. So let's get started. I'll be talking about the collaboration, why we chose the Greensboro sit-ins for this project, what some key resources were that we used. I'll talk about the research modality, and my word for it is the mosaic approach, and you'll hear more about that. I'll talk about how we divided this up into themes and how we divided each theme into a topic. I'll talk about QR codes and Google Documents because that was really the way that we shared our information. I'll discuss the display, how we presented this, how we involved our community. I'll mention research skills. I'll talk about how we evaluated this project. There are a few key tips involved with the project timeline that I'd like to pass on to anyone who might do a program like this. And at the end of this webinar, I'll talk a little bit about the Sara Jaffarian Award. The photograph at the top is me on your right, and my chief collaborator and partner in crime, Elizabeth Grassi. Elizabeth Grassi is a history teacher. She did not teach the students who were doing this research, but she and I have worked together on a lot of projects. She's just a wonderful creative master teacher, and she has a special interest in the civil rights era. So she worked with me to develop the structure and the strategies, and so she was very important to all of this. The lower picture, Jason Craig Harris is our Director of Diversity, and Lietzel Shane is the Director of Co-Curricular Programming. So I showed them because they gave us a lot of encouragement and administrative support. And anytime that you're working with any kind of racial justice issue or history that is involved with civil rights, you certainly want to reach out to anyone in your organization who is involved in diversity work. And Jason Harris was very helpful to us, mostly in framing some of the publicity around this project and helping us to formulate some of our concepts. Our teachers, Elise McLean is on the left and Stefan Stonici. They are the 8th grade history teachers, and they were the people that implemented this with their students. And I can't say enough good things about them. You really cannot do anything as a teacher in a school if you don't have teachers who are going to be flexible and listen to your ideas and contribute their own ideas. So they were really wonderful people to work with on this project. Our students, you can see how great they are. Here are just 4 of them. And Greensboro. I think before I talk about this slide, I'll move back one. I think this is the place in the webinar where I want some of my students to introduce the topic. So you're going to hear from Evan and Peyton, and it's a short video. It's about 2 minutes, and they will talk about the content of this project.
Okay, so during the 50s and 60s, there was a lot of segregation in lunch counters. So basically, department stores like this one, which is Woolworths in North Carolina, there were a lot of segregation where whites and blacks could shop at the store, but they couldn't eat there. So it was a double standard that many people challenged and was protested against.
Now, eventually, 4 African-American college freshmen at A&T University decided to spark a civil rights movement by walking into one of these Woolworths and asking at the counter and politely asking to be served. Now, the manager did not ask that. He asked them to leave, but they did not leave, and the manager couldn't do anything about it. So the movement started to pick up pace. More and more people joined. Eventually, there were about 300 people that participated, including some of the people in this picture.
So, in this image, it's a guy holding a sign that says, "Give us American rights," which relates to the rights that are appointed in the Constitution, such as the 15th Amendment and later the 24th Amendment that was passed. So, this one's saying, "Give us American rights," and then this sign, it has a scale and it says equality on it, which relates to the double standard that many African Americans faced during the 50s and 60s, and it basically is a scale, which is they wanted an equal scale for both races.
I understand that some of you didn't see or hear the video. I did not see or hear the video either. My apologies for that. Evan and Peyton were talking about the Greensboro sit-ins, about how 4 young college students got together and decided to walk into a drugstore and ask to be served. This was in 1960 in Greensboro, and in North Carolina, it was a segregated lunch counter, and it took quite a bit of courage to do that. They were joined by hundreds and eventually by thousands of other people protesting segregated lunch counters throughout the South. This was not the first event of the civil rights era. It followed the Montgomery bus boycotts. Martin Luther King had led some peaceful protests, but this was a very bold move, and it resulted in widespread desegregation of lunch counters throughout the South. So that's what the video showed, and maybe if you watch the recorded version of this webinar, that video will show up. I would have said, for those of you who could have seen this, that one of the students contained a factual error in his what he said. He said that the sit-ins began the civil rights era. So that isn't quite correct. But if you're working with students and getting them to talk about what they're learning without a script, you're probably not going to get a perfectly error-free video. And so we certainly talked to students and had students learning about how the sit-ins fit within the bigger picture of the civil rights protests in the 50s and the 60s. But there are going to be some imperfections when students are talking without a script. And we thought that by and large they did a fantastic job of that. So why did we choose the Greensboro sit-ins? We felt it was a seminal event in the history of the civil rights movement, but not as well known or as widely studied as some of the other events. It was a peaceful protest. The people who opposed it were not always peaceful, but the people who were the proponents and who ran this and went in and sat were always peaceful. So that exemplifies the values of our school mission and our Quaker values, which are very much involved with peace. The young people who started this are just a few years older than our students, so we thought they would be good role models, people that our 8th graders could identify with, and perhaps see themselves becoming activists in a similar way. This topic fits within our existing 8th grade history curriculum. They already study the civil rights era, and so it was not a huge leap. It was not something that had to be shoehorned into the curriculum. It fit right in with what these teachers focus on in the 8th grade year. And there are good, ample resources that are available for 8th grade students. Those of you who work with students know that you can have the greatest topic in the world, and if you don't have books and websites and articles that are written at a level that your students can read and understand, you might as well not do that project at all. But this was a topic that had good resources for our young learners. So I'm going to mention this book, Sitting for Equal Service. It's 160 pages, very well written for a 7th or an 8th grade reader. Lots of pictures, very well documented. Information is divided into readable chunks. So most of our students use this book. And we use some databases. I would point out Britannica ImageQuest, not because they had a lot of pictures for the Greensboro sit-ins. They did have a few, but because they do have good citations and kind of set a standard for citations. And we used some websites for mostly for the images, the Greensboro Center and Museum, the New York Times, the North Carolina History Project, and also the American Memory Project, which is run by the Library of Congress. There are 2 picture books available that are all about the sit-ins. We read these to our younger students. We wanted them to see the exhibit. We wanted them to know what was going on in the library. So either one of both of these books makes a great introduction to the civil rights era and to the Greensboro sit-ins in particular. We read these to 3rd graders and 4th graders, and these books were meaningful to them. We had 3 classes of 8th graders. Each class had 20 students. And so we divided them up into small groups of 2 or 3 per group. Each group worked together on a very small topic, and each group was expected to create a product of about 1 or 2 paragraphs of information with an archival photograph that explained that writing. So I call this the mosaic research process. Mosaic approach looks at a subject in small, accessible chunks. You divide something up into lots of small bits, and then the students each focus on something small and write about that and research that. And another key part of that is the students really have to listen to each other, read each other's writing, so that they get the big picture of the whole subject. This contrasts Canvas research with Mosaic research. Canvas research, that's just my word for it. It's the standard, in a way you can call it traditional research that we're all familiar with. Every student explores a topic in depth. They put out substantial written projects. Or if it's a media production, it might be a substantial movie, maybe a 10-minute movie. Or if it's a slideshow, it might be a slideshow with 20 slides. So it's really a substantial amount of output. And because there's so much work involved in each separate project, the students really don't have time to read each other's work or look at each other's work as much. And it's a very good kind of research experience. Students develop their skills with organizing a lot of details, creating a thesis, and supporting it. And I think we're all familiar with that kind of research, and we've all done it. So in contrast to that, I would say Mosaic research, as I said, divides a subject up into little bite-sized topics. And the output is brief, no more than 2 paragraphs in this case. Students have to read each other's work, and they work on their skills of writing concisely, summarizing, and listening, and perhaps being able to speak and explain their own topic within just a few minutes. So it's a different kind of way of approaching information. We thought about the Greensboro sit-ins as having certain themes. What was life like for African Americans in the segregated society? How did the sit-ins begin? Who or what inspired the young men who started this movement, the Greensboro Four? Who were their supporters? And that was a very fascinating part of this project because they had many different kinds of people supporting them, both white people and people of color. Who were their opponents? And what were the effects of the sit-in? And then we took each of those themes and we divided those up into the topics. So for example, the theme of inspirations, we divided that up into these 4 topics: Gandhi's nonviolent protests, the Little Rock Nine leadership in school desegregation, Martin Luther King's peaceful protest marches, and Rosa Parks and the Montgomery bus boycott. The Greensboro Four are very aware of all of these and have spoken at length in interviews about how each of these things influenced them and got them to the point where they were ready to mount a sit-in. So what did that work product look like? Every group had to create a poster, and that's what you see on your left. It's an 8.5 by 11 size poster, just a small sheet of paper. We thought about developing these into large posters, but these archival images are not of a quality that they can be expanded beyond 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. They just lose their definition. So we stayed with the 8.5 by 11 size posters. There's a headline at the top and a QR code underneath the image. That QR code gets scanned by a cell phone or by an iPad with a QR code reader, and then that takes the viewer to what we call the landing page. So that's what you see on your right. It's a Google document. It reiterates the title and the image, and then that's where the writing is. And the writing reflects the students' research and thought process. They look at the image, describe what's in the image, and talk about what role this moment played in the Greensboro sit-ins. The next thing that's going to happen, and I really hope this video works, it's a 4-minute video, And I'm going into the details of how I worked with the QR codes and how I worked with the Google Documents. Those of you who are very familiar with QR codes, maybe you can check your email right now, but I actually have some pretty good tips in here that you might want to be aware of if you work with QR codes and Google Documents with a large group of students for an exhibit that you would share with the public or with the larger community. All right, let's start the video.
We are also going to, in case you don't see the video, sorry to interrupt the video, but if you don't see the video on your screen, we're going to paste a link in the chat box. That will take you to a YouTube version. If you click that link, it should open in a new browser window, and you should be able to watch it alongside the rest of us, and then just come back to us when you're done.
QR codes and with Google Documents. What you see on the screen here is my Google Drive with a lot of student documents. Let's look at the topic Sit-In at the Charleston Crest Store. Here's the title. The student names would be right here. And here's a smaller version of the picture that they're writing about. And here is their essay. Just a short essay explaining the picture and its relationship to the overall topic. This is the landing page. Now, how do we get a QR code to go to this page? It's what we want the viewers to see when they scan the QR codes. Up here is the URL. I'm going to copy that. I'm going to go to the Google URL Shortener website. I'll paste that URL in this box, click Shorten, and not only do I have a beautiful short URL, I also have, move this over a little bit, these 3 dots. And I can click on QR code, and there's my code. I'm going to drag this over to my desktop. I'll go back to my drive. I'm going to start a new document. And this is the display document. So it's Sit-In at the Charleston store, or the Charleston Drug Store, and it's the QR code page. So we want to make sure we put that in the title up here. Here's my title. I certainly want to make that nice and big because it'll be on display. I want to bold it. Underneath that, the student names will be here. That will be smaller and centered. Right, here's a big, beautiful picture of the supporters who are staging their own sit-in at the Charleston store. And at the bottom of the page is where I'm going to put my QR code. So I'm dragging that from the desktop back to this Google document. That's where the picture would go in the center there. And the QR code goes at the very bottom of the page. My viewers come in, they see the title, they see the picture, and here's the QR code. They scan that code, and that takes them to this landing page where the explanation can be read. I'm going to talk a little bit about sharing permissions. I have to just move this screen over a tiny bit. So whenever you make a Google document, you have to click this button or share and specify who can view this document. This document is set so that anyone with the link can view it, and that's what you want. But a lot of schools have this automatically set to anyone at Friends Seminary, or anyone at the school can view. So you want to make sure that your documents are set up so that when people scan that code, anyone who is in your library who has permission to be there can see this document when they scan that code. And so for that, you want to make sure that it's not just limited to people who are directly a part of the school network, but for anyone with the link. So parents who come in, caregivers, other kinds of visitors, you want anyone to be able to scan that code and not get an error message, but just to see that wonderful landing page. So that's how that works, and I hope it makes sense. I could see that, and I even could sort of understand what I was saying in my own video. So I hope most of you could see that as well. That's fantastic. I'm seeing a few comments on the side. Yes, it worked for at least some of you. Great. Our students were super excited about the topic. They were super excited about the images. They were not jumping up and down with joy over all that fiddly work with the QR code and setting the sharing permission. And why would they be? They were 13 years old. So they worked pretty hard. We worked hard getting them to set those up properly, but somebody is going to have to check those QR codes. What that means is when your students have printed out the posters and they've completed their Google documents, somebody, and it's probably going to be you, is going to have to get out a cell phone, a personal cell phone, not a school device, your personal cell phone, and scan those QR codes and check them. And make sure that they really do go to the correct landing page and that you can read every single one of them with a device that doesn't necessarily belong to the school. The most embarrassing thing in the world, almost, is have a visitor come into your school and scan those QR codes and say, it doesn't work, I can't read it. So I don't want to hear any of that, it doesn't work. It has to work. So you want to make sure that you check them. And if they don't work, then you are probably going to be the one who corrects them and prints out a new poster, unless you have a lot of time to work with your students. We're all kind of pressing in on the available time, and I wanted our students to focus on their writing and their thinking. I was more than happy to do some of the back office work, correcting some of the little mistakes that came up with the QR codes. I would suggest you use a style sheet. You want to keep the formatting consistent. In just a minute, you're going to see the way this display looks in the library. You can't see the posters up close in the picture that I put on the screen, but if you were in my library, you would have seen posters that were formatted consistently. They all had titles that were the same size. They were all bold. They were all the same font. They all had images that were centered, not all the way over on the left or all the way over on the right. It made a nice uniform look. And to do that, it's very helpful to have a style sheet, something that looks like what you see on your screen that you can pass out to the students and tell them, this is how you want your poster to look. And they're still going to play around with it and do some things that are a little different, but this will get you closer to that nice, consistent, uniform look. So this is how my display looked, our display, I should say. Here are the posters. They're put up around the library. And those yellow signs, those are the themes that I mentioned earlier on, so that a visitor can have a sense of what the concepts are behind this series of events that are represented in the images. I duplicated this exhibit. I put an exact copy of the same exhibit up in the hallway outside the library. And that was because we had an opening night. We invited all the parents. So we had lots and lots of parents, and we thought it would be a little crowded if everyone was in the library. So we had half the people in the library and half the people in the hallway, and it was an identical exhibit. So you can think about that. If you're going to have a big event with a lot of people coming at the same time, you can duplicate your exhibit and put it in more than one location. This is our opening night. We had our students standing next to their posters, and then they were talking to their parents as they cycled through and listened to each of the talks. So the parents really didn't need to be scanning the QR codes. The QR codes weren't necessary for opening night because the students were talking and they were doing the explaining. But after opening night, those QR codes were very important because we couldn't have students standing by their posters for 8 hours a day while people were walking through. But it turned out to be a nice thing that we got the students to practice giving their talks and articulating what they had researched in their own words. These are a few scenes of students who are scanning the codes. We had classes coming through. We had younger students looking at them and reading the landing pages to each other. So that was another way that this exhibit got viewed. I would suggest you think about having a guest book if you have an exhibit like this. Lots of people who came to look at these images had things they wanted to say. The topic was meaningful, it was emotional for many people. Some people had relatives who had been a part of various civil rights protests and wanted to talk about that. I heard some wonderful personal anecdotes that this exhibit inspired people to share. And I wish that I'd had a guest book. People could have written some of those down and I would have had a more permanent record. So you might want to think about that. The students read for relevance and context. They certainly used multiple sources for information. Writing with concision was a challenge for some of the students. You all heard that joke about if I'd had more time, I could have written a longer book. Sometimes it's harder to be concise than it is to be very prolix. The students were motivated by the fact that they were creating information for an audience, for their parents, for their peers, for other students in their school community. Finding and selecting images, that was pretty challenging. And I'll talk about that in the next slide as well. Archival images. These were all black and white. They were not high resolution, and some of them were a little tricky to see in detail. Our students are used to looking at images, but the images they look at are color images, very high resolution, and usually about things that they're familiar with, their friends, places they're going, that kind of thing. These are events that are remote in time and outside of their experience and not necessarily that easy to understand the first time you glance at them. So that was part of the research project. We found that we had to explicitly encourage the students to read the text around the images carefully and to really be careful about getting the correct information. And we certainly found that images that students found in the general Google search and even images that were on very well curated websites didn't always have citations that were formatted in a complete or consistent way. And I will just say that with regard to the citations, we had to let go of that. We did ask for an image credit. We asked the students to copy and paste the URL where they found the image, and we worked a lot with them on determining the suitability and the reliability of the websites where they got their images. But we didn't have time for everything, and the work of creating complete and correct citations for images is very challenging and very detailed. And so that's where we did not work as hard. I'll just say another word about images. Sometimes they can be tricky. This is the iconic image of the Greensboro sit-ins. Sometimes it comes with a caption or a headline that identifies these four young men as the Greensboro Four. Well, two of them are. Joseph McNeil and Franklin McCain were two of the original four. Billy Smith and Clarence Henderson are also in this wonderful picture. They were committed, courageous supporters of this movement, but they were not among the original four who were the very first to walk in and start the sit-in. So you want to be careful about how you check your citations and how you check all the information in any kind of archival image situation. We kept notes about what was working. We kept a lot of notes about what we would do differently. We did a student survey after the project was over, and we got a lot of good comments from our students on that. And we talked to the teachers at the conclusion of this and took notes on what they said they liked and what they thought needed more work. This project was begun in February of last year, and it was completed in April. I would say the exhibit went up at the end of the second week in March. Then we went on spring vacation, and we left it up for about 4 weeks after we came back from spring vacation. So we did our planning in the spring before. We set our opening night date early in the year and got that on the school calendar, and the advanced planning allowed us to order materials in plenty of time. The key thing about the timeline is that you want to plan backwards from your opening night. So if you're going to put up an exhibit, you have your deadline when the work is due, and then somebody has to read and correct all the QR codes, correct all the spelling errors, correct all the grammar. If you have time for the students to do all the corrections, fantastic. If you don't, you are going to do it because you don't want errors that are on public display. So here's your deadline. You want to give yourself time to do all that reading and correcting and printing everything out and then putting everything up. And I think 2 weeks is a good amount of time between the deadline and opening night. If it's longer than 2 weeks, your students are going to kind of fade out from it a little bit. Time goes very quickly when you're young and also when you're old, so you don't want to let too much time go by between the deadline for the work and the date of the opening night. But you also don't want to give yourself only 3 days. My eyes can do about 10 hours a day of screen time, and after that, they stop working. And Elizabeth is pretty much the same. So if you can be on a screen and working and correcting QR codes for 13, 14 hours a day, great. You can probably turn that around in less than 2 weeks. Otherwise, you're going to need that time. You want to have time for your students to rehearse their docent talks. And that we only did 1 or 2 rehearsals on that because they were talking to each other about their topics all the way along. But you do want to schedule time for that. And so all of that means is that you have to limit your number of topics to what you can proofread and check in that 2-week period. I mentioned earlier we had 60 students, and we divided that up into 20 topics. And that was just about right. That's what the students could handle, and it's what Elizabeth and I could reasonably handle. We wanted to have an exhibit that really reflected the care and the respect that we had for the topic. So if you're working with civil rights topics, that's something that touches on people's identities, legacy, memory, emotions. It certainly is relevant to what's going on in the world today. And we felt that typos and misidentifications of images would look like we didn't care enough. And we thought that would look disrespectful. So that's why we limited our number of topics, and that's how the timeline worked. We loved getting the Sara Jaffarian Award. You get this beautiful crystal award with engraving on it, and you get $5,000, which we are in the process of planning how we're going to use to enhance our curriculum. We are very, very excited to get that award. So if you apply for the award, you get lots of instructions on the website. The application has 6 parts, and it's a limit of 600 words, so it's not too overwhelming. That's about 3 paragraphs. You can upload media. So if you think you might be doing a project where you might apply for an award, take videos, take photographs, keep copies of your key handouts. And they want recommendations. We got a recommendation from a parent. We had no problem finding a parent who was happy to write a recommendation for us. And of course, we had an administrator writing a recommendation. The application asks you to describe your project, what the impact on the community was, how it fit in with your curriculum, how you evaluated yourself and how you were successful. And they talk about replicability. And I think that's part of what this webinar is about. The idea is for people to share ideas and for other organizations to be able to take these ideas and share them in their own communities. So I'll talk about that in one minute. In fact, I'm going to talk about it right now, since we're on the topic of replicability. You can do this project for sure without QR codes and without Google Documents. You print out your posters and you have the writing on 2 or 3 sheets of paper right next to the picture. That could work fine. You can create your posters and then have the written description bound together as pamphlets, and I think that could work very well. You even could do this project with limited internet access. You could print out the pictures and make them available to your students. Believe me, the topic of this is so interesting to young people. They will be happy to look at these pictures even without the thrill of doing their own searching. So I think this is definitely a project that can be replicated even with fewer technological resources than what we had. You definitely need that book, the Melanie Hare book that I talked about earlier. It's a wonderful idea to have as much internet access as you can have, but if you have that book and you have some access to some of the websites, this is very doable. The reflection and the unexpected benefits. This was really a fun part of the application to fill out because it made us really think about what were the benefits of this that we didn't envision fully when we set out to do this. The degree to which this was meaningful to our community was very rewarding. Caregivers in the library after school would walk up and scan these QR codes. Members of the custodial staff brought in their cell phones and scanned the QR codes and read about the information. Prospective parents walking through the library would stop and look and read the information. Students who were in the library doing homework or spending time during a study hall would look around and walk up to the posters and scan the QR codes. This was interesting to people, and people wanted to talk about it and said over and over how much they appreciated that our students were learning about the Greensboro sit-ins and learning about some of the values of peaceful citizen activism that are represented by the sit-ins. You might think about whether that mosaic approach can work for you if you would like to try it out with other subjects. I hope lots of you will be inspired to work on the Greensboro sit-ins in one way or another. I think we're all looking for all different kinds of interactivity. This is one kind, and we're all always looking for that sense of drawing the viewer in and getting them to do something or interact with the material. And then I would also just say, if you can find a subject that really appeals to your community, emotionally and intellectually, that is a beautiful thing. Because then people want to learn and they want to be engaged. And this is something that worked out that way. You can email me if you have questions. There's an email for ALA's Public Programs Office. And I think we're up to the point where we can open this up for Q&A.
That is true. Thank you so much, Constance. We have some time for questions, so feel free to write those in the chat box now. I also wanted to put a couple more links in the chat box, which I'll do right now. This is a link for more information about Friends Seminary's project. Also at that link, you will find a link to the video that we played that failed for many of you. If you scroll down to the bottom of the page, you'll actually see 3 videos that Constance submitted of students talking about the project. The video that we played in this webinar is the first of those links. And I also wanted to share a link to the application that Constance submitted. If you are interested in applying for the Jaffarian Award for 2017, we are accepting applications from February 3rd to May 5th, 2017. That is for projects during the 2016-17 school year, and you are more than welcome to read the Friends Seminary application and borrow from some of their great ideas in that application. So with that, I want to first thank Constance again for presenting and see if we have any questions. Sandra says, I understand you had an information sheet on the landing page. Did the QR code lead to student videos?
Okay, I can answer that. Can you hear me? Yeah, all right.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. No, the video that I showed you of students talking about the Greensboro sit-ins, that was just a video that I took to document the project. The landing page was, the QR code takes the viewer to the landing page where people read the information. We did not have QR codes taking viewers to videos, although that is something you can do, and I've done it with other projects.
I also wanted to ask Constance about your future plans with this program. And what, if you're doing it again, what will you change in the future?
We are going to do it again. I've continued to learn more about this. I want to add if I can fit it in, I'd like to add a topic about the way that what I would call, I guess I could call it the legacy. There have been reenactments of the sit-ins. There have been various celebrations around this. There are museum exhibits about this, and we thought that would be a good thing to have. Also, I've been slowly finding more information on the protests that were staged in New York in solidarity with the Greensboro sit-in. So people picketed the Woolworths in Harlem, not because it was a segregated lunch counter, but out of solidarity. So I've been working on getting more information on that for our students as well.
That's great, thank you. I think we are finished with our questions. If anyone else has one, please quickly write it in the chat box. It looks like you've covered everything.
Well, thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, Ben.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. It's truly an honor to have people logging on and spending their precious time taking a webinar with me, and I wish you all the very best.